You never want to underestimate crazy and desperate. Crazy and desperate put together can bring about all kinds of obvious insanity. I think the Democrats are very much in a position right now where they are getting desperate, where they are recognizing that this is their focus on two issues: democracy, which is absurd, and that's the primary one, and abortion. Yes. Is a disastrous. They already are realizing this. It's a disastrous policy. In fact, one trend that I noticed over the weekend, and I know you saw this too, very interesting in competitive places, competitive states, New York, Oregon. Guess what's going on, everybody? All of a sudden, with the midterms looming, there are some Democrats who are really changing their tune. We are 2 weeks away from Election Day. There's early voting underway, right? I mean, this is super late in the game. You have two things going on, Clay. One, all of a sudden, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, is saying, yeah, we're going to put a lot more cops on the subway because the subway is really not safe enough, and we take safety seriously. Oh, hold on a second, Clay. Just a few days ago or a few weeks ago, the mayor of New York was saying the subway's fine. It's just a perception issue. You mean to tell me that she realizes her job's on the line and now she's pro-cop all of a sudden? What a shock.
Yeah, that is not a surprise. And I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I really have made this analogy for a while. But every time I look at the Democrat arguments, it feels to me, Buck, like Democrats are tanking for the overall number one draft pick in a sport. For those of you out there who are not big NBA or NFL fans who pay a lot of attention to this, typically the worst team gets the first pick. And if there's a really talented playmaker out there, a lot of times teams that are bad will say, we want that number one pick. The difference is that actually makes sense, Buck, in the context of sports sometimes because you can get an elite transcendent player. It really feels like the incompetence here of the Biden White House has no payoff going forward other than abject misery and failure.
And I have to point out to everybody, what you bring up there, tanking to get the number one pick, is tied into the plot line of the fantastic movie Major League, which is about the Cleveland Indians.
There you
not
go.
To be
you got
confused
it right.
with any other sports franchise that may or may not exist out there. Just make sure everyone gets that one right. And Clay, you see that in New York. The subway has become, and I grew up in New York City,
it's
80s
a symbol
and 90s.
Of the danger.
It's a symbol of the danger. And the thing is, because everybody really who's working and not able to work from home, at some point you got to be on the subway. I mean, unless you're fortunate enough to live walking distance to work or you're a car commuter, if you're in New York City, you're going to be on the subway at some point. And millions, literally millions are on a day-to-day basis. I think it's 2 million riders a day, something like that. Or 2 million rides a day. So that's a huge indicator of what's going on here. All of a sudden, at the last moment, Kathy Hochul, who's we're going to put up gun-free zone signs in Times Square. That's going to protect you, which is idiocy, and we all know that. She's saying we're going to put more cops on the subway. Mayor Eric Adams is also now saying we're going to put more cops on the subway. All of a sudden, what was fear-mongering, all of a sudden, what for months Republicans have been saying is being adopted. And in some ways, the even more amazing one, Clay, I know you saw this, was Ted Wheeler, who we give credit where it's due here. We're very honest. I have said many times that Bill de Blasio was the worst mayor in America, but I'd always throw in there runner-up Ted Wheeler of Portland. Like, Portland's Ted Wheeler is a particularly awful mayor, and he has come out now to say that I think it's hundreds of unofficial but established homeless encampments in the city of Portland have got to go. He's finally come out and said, we're not just going to allow this endless siege of homelessness against the city. Who are these people sounding like, Clay? They're sounding like you and me and their critics all of a sudden when people are going to start voting.
Yeah, well, this is what sanity versus insanity, what we've talked about for the run-up to the midterms, and I think, frankly, is going to be what we talk about as we get ready for the 2024 presidential election. A lot of times you can take away Democrat and Republican and just replace it with insane. Many Democrat policies are actually insane. And here is the numbers coming out of Portland, Buck. This is, I'm reading, our guys at Outkick got it put up. 81% of residents of Portland believe that the George Floyd protests were disastrous for their city. I mean, think about how woke and left-wing and filled with white liberals a city like Portland is. Probably Portland, Buck, I think you'd probably agree, was the woke-topia. For woke white people, still a very white city, they all went in on the idea of America's an awful, racist, deranged, fundamentally evil place. And now 81% of voters think the George Floyd protests were disastrous for the city.
You might have seen the TV show Portlandia, which was about that, about Portland as this pseudo-idyllic
space cadet, but it was like kind of a more
utopia.
Benevolent thing, right?
No, of course. But I'm saying,
Initially,
but they would make jokes about how people, before they could like eat chicken nuggets, needed to know, well, what was the chicken's name? What were the chicken's aspirations in life? Did he have, plenty of free roaming area and all that kind of stuff? It was the distillation of lifestyle liberalism. But when it's about food and it's about, handicrafts and things like that, that's all fine. Libs are good at that.
Plastic
Libs are good
straws, it's frustrating, but it's not like destroying the country.
Right. But when you talk about public safety, when you talk about efficiency in government, when you talk about law and order, these ideas they have are insane. I mean, that's the only way you can say it. And I have to say as well, because I'm down here in Fort Pierce. I'm at WPSL 1590 here, and Florida just got its, and we got the DeSantis debate tonight. I'm going to be there against Charlie Crist. The Sanibel Causeway, which you talked about last week, has been rebuilt, and it's really. I know it sounds like, oh well, how much of an achievement is that? If you see what was washed away in the destruction, and you see what it is now. In 2 weeks, this is remarkable. I mean, it's a remarkable achievement in engineering, the first responders, the people that did this, but it is being overseen by Ron DeSantis. Flip to the other side of the page, Clay. In California, Gavin Newsom has now said that the $1.3 million solo public toilet is such an embarrassment, and it was going to take 3 years to build it, that this is unacceptable. California spends $1.3 million on and 3 years to build one public toilet, okay? And in Florida, they can get disaster relief done including a causeway. And I know it's a long process, a lot of rebuilding, but they can do projects like the rebuilding of the Sanibel Causeway in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, and not only that in California, we mentioned this, I think, on the show, Buck, but the trillions of dollars they're spending on that railway, the train that basically is going from nowhere. It's supposed to go L.A. to San Francisco, right? And instead, it's going to go like not to either of them, and it's way over budget, and nobody's going to ride it. And it is, to me, an embodiment of the failure of a big government system when only one political party's involved.
That train may truly be, there may be flying cars by the time that train is finished. Like, I'm not kidding. I mean, if you look at the projections,
unbelievable boondoggle.
It's going to be finished like next century. And this is just what, and you say, well, how? I think this is so important too. How is this possible? Because this all comes back to, folks, why is cost of living so high? Why is inflation so high? Why does everyone in America feel poorer and less certain of the future? There are reasons for this that tie directly to the Democrat Party, to the decisions they've made, to the ideology that animates the Democrat Party. And it's unavoidable now. I mean, that's why there's this possible likely red wave that's going to happen now. I mean, Clay, the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department, when they were explaining, how do you even spend, like, honestly, how do you spend $1.3 million on one toilet? It was, quote, cost of planning, of permits, of reviews of permits, of public outreach, of construction management for a toilet. That's how you spend $1.3 million. This is a microcosm of the California public school system, of the California public sector unions. Go down the list. They're destroying these states.
It's also a perfect representation of people who don't understand business, because there is no cost associated issues with something like this, right? Government is not typically very efficient. Lots of big companies are not efficient. But for any of you out there that have worked where profit is the motive, sooner or later, somebody looks at the books and says, we are spending way too much here. We talked about this last week, Buck. I really do believe that you could cut half of all federal employees in one fell swoop, and the overall efficiency of our federal government wouldn't change at all.